You never forget the moment your life shatters. For me, it was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. I remember the time exactly because I've been watching the clock all day, excited to surprise my family by coming home early for my nursing shift. My name is Emma Mitchell, and at 35, I thought I had everything figured out. A fulfilling career as a pediatric nurse, two beautiful children, and what I believed was a solid marriage to James, my college sweetheart. But life has a way of proving you wrong in the most brutal ways possible. Our house was quiet when I walked in, which wasn't unusual for that time of day. The kids would still be at school, and James normally worked late at his law firm. That's why finding his car in the driveway had surprised me. Maybe he'd have the same idea, coming home early to spend time together. I noticed the papers on the kitchen table first. Legal documents spread out neatly like a place setting for the worst dinner of my life. The word divorce stared up at me in bold black letters, and underneath, in James's precise handwriting, were notes about custody arrangements. "You're early." I turned to find James standing in the doorway of his home office, his expression unreadable. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, something he only did when he was preparing for a difficult conversation. "What is this?" I asked, even though the answer was painfully obvious. He walked over to the table, straightening the papers with practiced precision. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore, Emma. I've tried to be patient, but I can't keep pretending." "Pretending what?" My voice sounded strange in my ears, too calm for the hurricane building inside me. "James, I thought we were happy. If something's wrong, we can talk about it. We can get counseling." "I'm taking the kids," he cut me off, his tone as cold and formal as if he were addressing a hostile witness in court. "Full custody. It's better this way." The room started spinning slightly. Better? How could separating them from their mother be better? He smiled then, but it wasn't the warm smile I'd fallen in love with in college. This was something else. Calculated, almost cruel. "Because I'm going to tell everyone you left us, abandoned your family to find yourself, or whatever story seems most believable. Given your history, it won't be hard to convince people." My history. He meant my mother, who had walked out on our family when I was 12, leaving nothing but a note saying she needed space. The irony of him using my childhood trauma against me wasn't lost on me. "You can't do this," I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew he could. James was a partner at one of the city's top law firms, with connections throughout the legal system. I was a nurse who worked long hours and had missed more than a few school events because of my schedule. "I can and I will," he said, pushing the papers toward me. "Sign them now, and I'll make sure you get reasonable visitation rights. Fight me on this, and you'll never see them again." My hands trembled as I reached for the documents. "Why are you doing this?" For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt maybe, or doubt. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Because I found someone who can give me the life I deserve. Someone who'll be a proper mother to our children." The pieces clicked into place. The late nights at the office, the mysterious text messages, the way he'd been distant for months. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough to know it's real," he replied. "Melissa understands me in a way you never did. She knows what it means to build a legacy." Melissa. The name hit me like a physical blow. His new associate, barely 30, with her perfect wardrobe and ambitious plans. I'd met her at the firm's Christmas party last year. Noticed how she laughed too hard at James's jokes. Touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs no longer able to support me. The room felt too small suddenly, the walls closing in as 15 years of marriage crumbled around me. Through the window, I could see the oak tree where we'd built the kids' treehouse together. The garden where we buried a time capsule on our 10th anniversary. The time capsule. Something clicked in my mind, a plan starting to form. "Okay," I said quietly. James blinked, clearly thrown by my sudden compliance. "Okay." I met his gaze steadily. "You want me gone? Fine. You want to paint me as the villain? Go ahead. But remember something, James. The truth has a way of coming out eventually." He frowned, probably trying to decode any hidden meaning in my words. But I kept my expression neutral as I stood up. "I'll pack some things and be gone by tonight. Just let me say goodbye to the kids." James nodded slowly, suspicion warring with relief on his face. "They'll be home from school in an hour. Make it quick and clean. It'll be easier that way." I walked upstairs to our bedroom, my mind racing. I had 1 hour to set things in motion, to plant the seeds that would eventually expose everything James had been hiding. He thought he had all the power, that his carefully crafted plan would work perfectly. But he'd forgotten about the time capsule, and more importantly, he'd forgotten who I really was. Not just a nurse, not just a mother, but a woman who had learned from her own mother's disappearance that sometimes you have to play the long game. As I packed my clothes into a suitcase, I could hear James on the phone downstairs, probably talking to Melissa, planning their perfect future together. Let them think they'd won. Let them believe I was running away like my mother had. I had something much better in mind. Opening my jewelry box, I removed a small key that James had long forgotten about. The key to a safety deposit box where I'd been keeping careful records of everything I'd noticed over the past year. The suspicious bank transfers, the mysterious phone calls, the documents I'd found in his office late one night that made me start questioning everything. James was right about one thing. The truth would come out eventually, but it would happen on my terms, not his. I heard the school bus approaching outside and took a deep breath. Saying goodbye to my children would be the hardest thing I had ever done. But I had to play this perfectly if I wanted any chance of getting them back. Walking downstairs, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I didn't look like a woman whose life had just imploded. I looked calm, almost serene. James and Melissa had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate. It's carefully planned, meticulously executed, and served cold. The front door burst open and my heart clenched as Sophie and Lucas ran in, backpacks bouncing, faces bright with stories from their day at school. They froze when they saw my suitcase by the door. "Mommy?" Sophie's voice was small. "Are you going somewhere?" I knelt down and opened my arms, holding them close one last time. Over their heads, I could see James watching from the kitchen, his expression hard. "Remember, I love you," I whispered to my children. "No matter what anyone tells you, no matter what you hear, I love you more than anything in this world." As I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I couldn't, but I smiled slightly, thinking of the time capsule buried in the garden. James had always underestimated me, assumed I was naive, too trusting. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. 2 years passed like a slow-motion nightmare. James wasted no time spinning his story about my abandonment, painting himself as the heartbroken husband blindsided by his unstable wife's departure. Melissa moved into our house within months, seamlessly stepping into the role of devoted stepmother. I watched it all from a distance, living in a small apartment across town and working double shifts to pay for the lawyer I could barely afford. The custody arrangement James had forced on me allowed supervised visits twice a month, 4 precious hours where I could hold my children and try to keep their memories of me alive. "Daddy says you left because you didn't want to be a mommy anymore," Sophie told me during one visit, her voice wobbling. She was 8 now, her face losing its baby softness. "Melissa says sometimes grown-ups make selfish choices." I fought back tears, remembering James's threat about visitation rights. "Sometimes things aren't what they seem, sweetheart. Sometimes people have to make hard choices to protect the ones they love." Lucas at 6 was quieter during our visits, clinging to me like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. The court-appointed supervisor watched our every interaction, making notes that would inevitably end up in James' hands. But while James and Melissa built their perfect life in my old house, I was building something too, a case that would blow their world apart. The safety deposit box had been just the beginning. For months before James sprung the divorce on me, I'd been collecting evidence. Bank statements showing unusual transfers to offshore accounts. Emails I discovered when James forgot to log out of his computer. Photographs of meetings that didn't match his official schedule. My best friend Sarah thought I was torturing myself by investigating. "Let it go, Emma," she'd plead. "Focus on moving forward." But she didn't understand. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. Not just for me, but for others who trusted James and his law firm with their lives and secrets. Then came the day I'd been waiting for. A text from my old neighbor Carol. "Something weird happening at your old house. They're landscaping the whole backyard." My heart raced as I pulled up the real estate listing online. Sure enough, James and Melissa had decided to sell the house. The photos showed my carefully tended garden ripped up, the yard being modernized for potential buyers. The time capsule. After 2 years of waiting, everything was falling into place. I called Ryan Morrison, an investigative reporter I'd been carefully feeding information to for months. "It's time," I said when he answered. "They're going to find it." Ryan had been skeptical when I first approached him with my suspicions about James's firm, but the evidence I gathered was too compelling to ignore. Wire fraud, evidence tampering, client theft, all buried beneath the respectable veneer of Mitchell and Associates. "Are you sure about this?" Ryan asked. "Once it starts, there's no going back. I thought about my children, about the lies they've been told. I'm sure. Everything's in that capsule. Documents, photos, flash drives. Things James never knew I had. Once Melissa finds it." "Why are you so certain she'll be the one to find it?" I smiled grimly. "Because I know Melissa. She's territorial. She'll want to supervise every detail of the landscaping herself. And when she sees that metal box..." 2 days later, my phone exploded with notifications. First, a series of increasingly frantic texts from James. "What did you do? How long have you known? Emma, we need to talk now." Then calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Reporters, probably. Ryan's story would be breaking soon. Finally, a call I did recognize. "Melissa." I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Melissa." Her voice was shaking with rage. "You planned this. All of it. You knew we'd find that box. How does it feel?" I asked quietly. "Finding out the man you thought you knew has been lying to everyone. That the perfect life you stole was built on fraud." "You bitch," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The FBI is here, Emma. They're going through everything." I closed my eyes, remembering the day I buried that time capsule. James had been distracted, barely participating in what he dismissed as a sentimental waste of time. He hadn't noticed me slipping in the extra documents, the backup drives, the evidence I'd been collecting since I first suspected something was wrong at his firm. "I did exactly what I needed to do," I replied. "Tell James I'll see him in court. This time, I'll be the one with all the power." I hung up as my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made my breath catch. "Pyrominant Elale Farm under federal investigation. Whistleblower evidence reveals years of fraud." Below was a photo of James being escorted from his office in handcuffs, his perfect facade finally cracking. Sarah called moments later. "My God, Emma. It's all over the news. James, the firm, how long have you known?" "Long enough," I said, watching as more news alerts rolled in. The story was spreading fast, exactly as Ryan had predicted. James's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and with it the lies he told about me. But this wasn't the end. The time capsule was just the beginning. I had more evidence, more secrets to reveal. James thought he'd destroyed me, but he'd only made me stronger. As I watched the chaos unfold on my TV screen, my phone lit up with another call. This time, it was my lawyer. "Emma," she said, her voice urgent. "In light of these developments, we need to file for emergency custody immediately. James is facing federal charges. No judge will let him maintain primary custody under these circumstances." My heart leaped. "How soon?" "We can be in court tomorrow morning. The DA's office is already cooperating. They want to talk to you about everything you uncovered." I sank onto my couch, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. 2 years of watching my children slip away. 2 years of being painted as the villain in James's story. But I'd never stopped fighting, never stopped working toward this moment. "One more thing," my lawyer added. "The FBI wants to meet with you. Apparently, what you found goes way beyond James and his firm. This could be bigger than anyone realized." I thought about the encrypted files I'd discovered, the connections I'd mapped out late at night while my children slept in their beds across town. James had been right about one thing. I'd never understood what it meant to build a legacy. But I understood what it meant to protect one. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters when I arrived the next morning. News of James' arrest had exploded overnight, and everyone wanted to know more about the whistleblower who brought down one of the city's most prestigious law firms. "Mrs. Mitchell, did you know about the fraud when you left? Was your departure planned? What made you start investigating your husband?" I walked past them without commenting, my heart pounding beneath my carefully chosen blazer. Inside, my lawyer waited with a team from the FBI's white-collar crime division. Mrs. Mitchell, Special Agent Diana Chen greeted me. We've been going through the evidence you collected. I have to say, I'm impressed. You documented everything meticulously. I had to, I replied. I knew no one would believe me otherwise. We gathered in a conference room where Agent Chen spread out photographs and documents from the time capsule. Seeing them again made my hands shake slightly, proof of everything I'd discovered during those last months of my marriage. The fraud goes back at least 7 years, she explained, pointing to a complex web of transactions I'd mapped out. James and his partners were stealing from client accounts, manipulating evidence, even blackmailing judges. But what's really interesting is where the money went. She pulled up an image on her laptop, a familiar face that made my blood run cold. Senator William Harris, one of the most powerful men in state politics. Your husband's firm wasn't just stealing, Agent Chen continued. They were funding illegal campaign activities, buying influence. The corruption runs deep. A knock at the door interrupted us. My lawyer entered, her expression triumphant. The emergency custody hearing is starting. And Emma, James' attorney, is here. They want to talk. I followed her to a smaller conference room where James's new lawyer, not anyone from his firm, which was now under federal investigation, waited with a proposed agreement. My client is willing to admit you lied about Mrs. Mitchell abandoning the family, the lawyer began. He'll agree to joint custody and will make a public statement clearing her name. Not good enough, my lawyer countered. We want full custody, with supervised visitation for Mr. Mitchell, if he's not in federal prison. You don't understand, James's lawyer leaned forward. He's willing to cooperate with the federal investigation. Name names, but he needs to know his children are taken care of. I almost laughed at the irony. Like he took care of them when he lied about their mother, when he let them believe I'd abandoned them? Mrs. Mitchell. No, I cut him off. Tell James I'll see him in court. Let a judge hear everything. How he threatened me, how he used his connections to manipulate the custody arrangement. Let everyone know exactly what kind of man he is. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Melissa had been arrested too, charged with conspiracy and evidence tampering. The perfectly crafted image she tried to create as the devoted stepmother was shattering along with everything else. The custody hearing was brief but intense. James appeared in an orange jumpsuit, his usual confidence replaced by desperate pleading. When the judge announced her decision, full custody to me, with James's visitation rights pending the outcome of his criminal trial, I felt 15 years of tension finally released from my shoulders. Outside the courtroom, Ryan was waiting with more news. His story had gone national, prompting investigations into other law firms with similar patterns of fraud. The FBI was calling it one of the biggest legal corruption scandals in state history. You did it, he said simply. You brought down the whole house of cards. But I barely heard him. Through the crowd, I spotted Sophie and Lucas with their court-appointed guardian. They ran to me, throwing themselves into my arms with a force that nearly knocked me over. Is it true? Sophie asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. Are we really coming home? Yes, baby, I whispered, holding them tight. We're going home. Later that evening, as the kids settled into their new rooms in my apartment, Sarah came over with wine and takeout. I still can't believe it, she said, shaking her head. All this time you were playing the long game. Even I thought you'd given up. I smiled, watching Sophie help Lucas arrange his stuffed animals on his new bed. I learned something from my mother's disappearance, I said quietly. Running away never solves anything. Sometimes you have to stay and fight, even if no one believes in you. The FBI wants you to consult on their investigation, Sarah mentioned. They say your background in organizing medical records helped you spot patterns they might have missed. I nodded. I'd already had several calls from Agent Chen about a potential position with their forensic accounting team. It seemed my attention to detail, the very thing James used to mock, had turned out to be my greatest strength. A week later, we moved into a new house across town. As I watched Sophie and Lucas explore their new rooms, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The pain, the sacrifice, the lonely nights spent piecing together evidence while my children slept in another woman's care. James had tried to destroy me, thinking I would break like my mother had. Instead, I'd become stronger, smarter, more determined. I turned his own weapons, his love of documentation, his belief in his own superiority, against him. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find Aunt Carol, my old neighbor, holding a box of cookies. "Welcome home," she said, pulling me into a hug. "I always knew you'd come back. Strong women always do." That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in my new backyard with a glass of wine. The stars were bright overhead, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt at peace. My phone buzzed. Another news alert. James had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Senator Harris and his former partners. The investigation was expanding, reaching into every corner of the corrupt system he'd been part of. Melissa had turned on him too, trying to save herself by revealing everything she knew. The perfect couple had imploded spectacularly, each blaming the other for their downfall. I closed the news app and opened my camera instead, scrolling through recent photos of Sophie and Lucas. They were smiling again, their eyes bright with hope instead of confusion and hurt. We had a lot of healing to do, a lot of trust to rebuild. But we had time now, time that James's arrogance had finally given back to us. In the end, he'd been right about one thing. The truth always comes out. He just never imagined that I would be the one to reveal it. I stood up, leaving my wine glass on the patio table. Inside, I could hear Sophie having a nightmare, a common occurrence since everything had happened. But this time, instead of crying for Melissa or James, she called out for me. "I'm here, baby," I said, gathering her into my arms. "Mommy's here, and I'm never leaving again." As I held my daughter, I thought about the lessons I wanted my children to learn from all this. Not about revenge or justice, but about resilience, about standing up for what's right, even when the whole world believes you're wrong. James had tried to write my story, the story of a woman who abandoned her family. Instead, I'd written my own. The story of a mother who never stopped fighting for her children, who turned her pain into purpose and her defeat into victory. And that was a legacy worth building.